He thought he was smarter than everyone else. Untouchable. Invisible. That no matter what he did, how violent, how cruel, he could always get away with it. For years, he walked among regular people like nothing was wrong. Like he didn't have blood on his hands. But what he didn't know, what he never expected, was that a single, almost invisible clue, a tiny, overlooked piece of evidence, would be the beginning of his downfall. And tonight, you're going to see how that clue cracked open a case that haunted detectives for years. You're going to get the answer you came for. And I promise, it's going to stick with you. Let's be real, true crime isn't just about watching terrible things happen. It's about understanding how evil hides in plain sight. How people like you and me can be surrounded by darkness and not even know it. That's why stories like this one grip us so tightly. Because somewhere deep down, we know it could happen anywhere. And tonight's case? It's personal. Not because I knew the victim or the killer, but because what happened could have happened to any of us. A quiet neighborhood. A trusted face. A man who knew how to play the system, how to manipulate people, how to erase every trace of his crimes, until one mistake changed everything. You and I, we're going on this journey together. I want you to pay attention not just to the facts, but to the patterns, the psychology, the emotional roller coaster of the investigators who refused to give up, and the families who held on to hope even when the system failed them. Because you're not just watching a video tonight, you're part of the investigation. You're going to think like a detective, feel like a witness, and experience what it means to chase down a ghost. And when the truth is finally revealed, I promise, it's going to hit hard. This isn't one of those stories where the killer confesses in the first 5 minutes. This guy was careful, calculated. He had a way of hiding his tracks that made even seasoned investigators question whether they were chasing a phantom. No fingerprints, no bloodstains, no direct witnesses. For a long time, he was just a whisper, an urban legend. And the deeper detectives dug, the more confusing things became. Red herrings, dead ends, false leads. Until one day, a junior investigator, barely a year into the job, noticed something strange in a photo that had already been reviewed dozens of times. A smudge, a reflection, something so small, so insignificant, that most people wouldn't give it a second glance. But this tiny clue? It would be the crack that shattered the entire case wide open. Now, I need you to really listen. This case is different. The killer wasn't some loner, hiding in the woods. He was respected. A coach. A neighbor. A father. The kind of guy who waves at you when you're walking your dog. The kind who shows up to community events with a smile and a homemade casserole. No one suspected him, not even when people around him started vanishing. Because when you think of a killer, you imagine a monster. But this man? He wore a mask. And he wore it well. And that's what makes this story so terrifying. Because the mask didn't just fool the public, it fooled the police, too. For years, they chased the wrong suspects, followed false tips, and watched as grieving families were left without answers. The case file grew thicker. The leads grew colder. And the man responsible? He got bolder, more comfortable, more reckless. He started leaving hints, maybe because he was taunting the police, or maybe because he wanted someone to stop him. We may never know. But what we do know is that justice was coming for him. And it started with one single, microscopic clue. You've probably seen headlines like this on your feed. Killer caught after DNA found in trash. Man confesses after forgotten voice memo surfaces. CCTV footage solves 10-year-old cold case. These stories are trending for a reason because we crave closure. We want to believe that no matter how dark things get, the truth will come out. That no matter how long it takes, the good guys eventually win. But let me tell you, the journey to justice in this case wasn't easy. It took grit. It took obsession. And at times, it felt like the darkness would win. I want you to think about something while you watch. What if this happened in your neighborhood? What if the face on the wanted poster looked familiar? What if the person sitting next to you at the PDA meeting was hiding a deadly secret? That's the kind of chilling reality this case brings to the surface. It reminds us that killers don't always look like killers. Sometimes, They're the ones you trust the most. And when that trust is shattered, the ripple effect can be devastating. You're going to meet the detective who sacrificed his marriage chasing the truth. You'll hear from the victim's sister, whose voice shook during every interview but never stopped telling her brother's story. You'll see real evidence, real footage, and step by step, we'll piece it all together. I'll show you how a detail so small it almost went unnoticed became the thread that unraveled an entire web of lies. Because this is more than just a story. It's a reckoning. And it proves one thing above all. No matter how smart a killer thinks he is, no one is truly untouchable. So stay with me. Don't click away. Don't skip ahead. Everything you're about to see builds to a reveal that will leave you stunned. You'll want to call someone when it's over. You'll want to double-check the locks on your doors. Because what happened in this story could happen again. It could happen anywhere. And just when you think you've got it all figured out, just when it seems like justice has finally won, a new piece of evidence comes in. A discovery so unexpected, so unbelievable, that even the lead detective couldn't make sense of it. And that's where everything changes. IT started like so many stories do, quietly, subtly, with a man who didn't stand out. Mark Delaney was the kind of person you might glance at twice in the grocery store, not because he looked suspicious, but because he looked normal. Middle-aged, trim, a sharp dresser with a habit of keeping his car spotless and his lawn even more so. He owned a modest home in a peaceful suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of Spokane, Washington. The kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and kids rode their bikes past dusk. To most, Mark was the model neighbor, charming in that overly polite way, always offering to help carry groceries or trim a tree branch. But underneath the surface, behind those careful smiles and overly rehearsed chuckles, was a truth no one had ever suspected. Or maybe they just didn't want to see it. For years, Mark lived what seemed like a picture-perfect life. He worked in IT security, often remotely, which gave him the freedom to vanish into his own world when no one was looking. A quiet divorce 5 years ago left him living alone. His ex-wife, Lisa, had moved across the state and rarely spoke of him except to say he had grown cold in the final years of their marriage, withdrawn, secretive, prone to angry outbursts she could never quite predict. But she never imagined he was dangerous. That word, dangerous, just didn't fit with the man she once married. After all, he had never laid a hand on her. He just slowly, methodically, made her feel like she was going insane. And yet, if you ask his coworkers, or what few remained after Mark started freelancing full-time, they'll say he kept to himself. Quiet, yes, but brilliant. Always 3 steps ahead. He could find flaws in the most complex security systems, like a predator sniffing out the weakest animal in a herd. That kind of mental agility made him a valuable asset, but it also made him difficult to pin down. It wasn't until local authorities began reviewing missing persons reports from the last 7 years that Mark's name started to surface, over and over again. Not because he was a suspect. Not yet. But because his name kept appearing in the periphery. Not as a friend or family member, but as someone who just happened to be around. A distant coworker. A man who once did a job for a friend of the victim. A presence you'd overlook until someone pointed out just how often he floated near tragedy. The most chilling part? He never seemed shaken by the disappearances. If anything, he'd offer his sympathies like someone commenting on a bad news story from 1,000 miles away. Detached. Measured. But now, looking back, it wasn't detachment, it was calculation. A man who had spent years perfecting how to appear concerned without ever actually caring. The case didn't fully crack until Rachel Monroe vanished. 29, nursing student, part-time waitress. Last seen getting off a late-night shift just 3 blocks from her apartment. The street cameras caught her walking alone, texting someone. The messages stopped at 10:17 p.m. Her phone went dead at 10:18. Detectives initially looked into her on-again, off-again boyfriend, Tyler, a volatile musician with a history of short tempers and long nights out. His social media was flooded with angry posts and cryptic lyrics about heartbreak and betrayal. Friends said he was intense and prone to jealousy. A perfect suspect, on paper. And that's what made the case so frustrating. Because as investigators dove deeper into Tyler's timeline, they found he had been 300 miles away that weekend, visiting his sick mother in Oregon. Alibis checked. Timestamps confirmed. He wasn't their guy. But by then, the media had already eaten him alive. Hashtags like #FindRachel and #BoyfriendDidIt were trending across platforms. And meanwhile, the real predator, quiet, watchful, was slipping back into the shadows. But there was something strange about Rachel's disappearance. Her phone wasn't just turned off, it had been wiped. Not erased in the normal way, but cleaned using a rare encryption protocol designed to delete data and destroy the partition metadata. Not something you could do by accident. Not something most people even knew existed. Unless, of course, you were an IT security expert. A name started surfacing again, faint but recurring. Mark Delaney. He had been contracted a few years earlier to run digital security protocols for a company where Rachel had briefly worked. The overlap was thin, but it was there. Still, the detectives couldn't move forward on a hunch. They needed more. And that's when a different case crossed their desk. Another missing woman, similar profile, same age range, same kind of sudden disappearance. Vanessa Hart, a dog groomer from the next town over. She'd vanished 3 years earlier. The only clue back then was a blurry photo from a parking garage camera showing what looked like a silver SUV near where Vanessa was last seen. The case had gone cold. But a junior investigator, Emily Vargas, noticed something no one else had. When cross-referencing footage from Rachel's last known location, there was another silver SUV. Different license plate, different state tag, but identical model. Too identical. And then she found it. A tiny reflection on the side mirror, barely visible. A parking sticker for an out-of-state university. One that Mark Delaney had visited for a conference just days before Vanessa went missing. The connection was thin, practically invisible. But it was a thread. And once it was pulled, other things started to unravel. Mark's travel history suddenly lined up with at least 3 other disappearances across Washington and Oregon. He always had an excuse. A conference, a contract job, a friend's wedding. But in each case, someone vanished nearby, and Mark left town days later. Still, nothing was concrete. Investigators were cautious. After all, how do you prove someone's a serial predator when he's left no blood, no witnesses, no clear forensic evidence? Everything they had was circumstantial. And Mark, he knew that. Which is why he didn't run. He kept his routine, kept waving at neighbors, kept living his life like he had nothing to fear. And yet, behind the scenes, something was shifting. Red herrings began to multiply. An ex-con released near Rachel's last known location, a suspicious Uber driver with a history of stalking female passengers, even a coworker with a secret obsession for true crime who posted disturbing fiction that eerily matched Rachel's case. Each one a possible suspect. Each one investigated, questioned, and cleared. It was like a twisted game of cat and mouse where the rules kept changing, the clock kept ticking, and the real villain stayed one step ahead. But what Mark didn't know, what none of the suspects knew, was that detectives were watching. Quietly. Carefully. And that the smallest clue, a reflection in a mirror, had already turned the tide of the investigation. The net was tightening. The evidence, though fragmented, was beginning to form a picture. And the killer who thought he was untouchable? He was about to find out how wrong he was. Because just as investigators started preparing to confront him with their findings, a call came in. A woman had come forward. Nervous. Shaking. Her voice barely a whisper. But what she said changed everything. She said she had been in Mark Delaney's house. And she had seen something she was never supposed. And that's when this story took its darkest turn yet. The woman's name was Danielle Carter, and her statement cracked open the case in a way no one could have expected. She had dated Mark Delaney briefly, almost a year prior, but had broken things off after feeling something she couldn't quite explain, something cold beneath his charm. At first, she chalked it up to paranoia, but then small things started to surface. Odd behavior. Locked doors inside his house. Late-night drives with no explanation. And then there was that one night she couldn't forget. She had wandered into his basement looking for her phone charger. Mark hadn't seen her go down there. She wasn't supposed to be there. What she saw was brief. A tarp, a row of plastic bins, the cold glint of metal tools too specialized for any household task. She hadn't told anyone back then. Fear kept her quiet. But when she saw Rachel Monroe's face on the news, something inside her snapped. She came forward. She wanted to help. But before investigators could act on her statement, something unexplainable happened. The physical evidence Danielle swore she saw, those tools, those bins, they were gone. Detectives secured a warrant, searched the property meticulously, but the basement was spotless. Impossibly clean. Every wall freshly painted, the floor scrubbed to perfection. No trace of the storage containers she described. No tools, no tarp, not a speck of dust out of place. Mark claimed he was remodeling, that he had just cleared the space for a home gym. His receipts, dated 2 days after Danielle's visit to the station, backed that story. It felt like he was always one step ahead, like he could hear them coming. And then there was the warning.
To see.
Detective Emily Vargas received an anonymous message. No number. No traceable metadata, just one sentence typed out in all caps. Stop looking into him, or you'll end up missing too. It could have been a sick prank. It could have come from anyone. But the timing was too perfect, too calculated. The same day the basement was wiped clean, someone wanted the investigation buried. Her supervisor told her to be cautious, to back off until more evidence was gathered. But Emily couldn't.
Not now.
She'd seen what this man was capable of, how he could manipulate a digital footprint, erase connections, outsmart surveillance. She had a gut feeling they were running out of time, and Rachel might not be his last victim. Things got even more tangled when a new figure entered the picture, Mark's former business partner, Kevin Hale. A cybersecurity analyst like Mark, but with none of the polish. Gruff, reclusive, and, as it turned out, nursing a bitter grudge. According to Kevin, Mark had sabotaged their company years ago, stealing client contracts and planting evidence that led to Kevin's financial ruin. The betrayal had never been proven, but Kevin had always maintained that Mark destroyed him. Now, he was offering to help the investigation, claiming he had dirt on Mark's digital side projects. But something about Kevin didn't sit right. He was too eager, too vindictive, and when detectives asked him for concrete proof, he stalled. Said he needed more time to find the right files. Said things like, "Trust me, it's all there," without actually providing anything. Was he a genuine whistleblower, or was he trying to settle an old score? Or worse, was he involved? And then a bigger problem emerged. One of the hard drives from Rachel's case, one that might have held metadata linking her deleted files to Mark's unique encryption signature, vanished from the evidence room. There were no signs of forced entry, no footage of anyone tampering with the logs, and everyone who had access swore they hadn't touched it. It was like the drive had never existed. Without it, the digital trail they had been piecing together unraveled. It was a devastating blow. Internal Affairs was called in, and the entire department started facing scrutiny. Fingers were pointed. Trust within the task force started to crack. Even Danielle began to waver. Days after coming forward, she stopped responding to Emily's calls. A wellness check was conducted, and she was found in her apartment, alive, but clearly shaken. She claimed someone had been watching her, that her car had been followed, that she'd received a photo of herself walking home at night, slipped under her door. But when police investigated, the security camera outside her building had been disabled. Whoever was doing this wasn't just smart, they were calculated. Every move seemed designed to disorient, distract, and dismantle the case. The closer they got to the truth, the more everything seemed to fall apart. Witnesses grew silent. Evidence vanished. Leads that once felt solid now felt like traps. And Emily began to wonder, was Mark acting alone, or was someone helping him? Someone inside the system? Someone who knew how to erase, deflect, and disappear things before they could become problems? But then a new piece of information surfaced. A bank statement. An obscure transfer from a shell company Mark had set up under a different name, one that connected to a P.O. box in a rural part of Idaho. It had been overlooked in the earlier sweep, buried in the sheer volume of financial noise. But now, it stood out like a flare in the dark. And what they found inside that P.O. box changed the entire investigation. Except they weren't the only ones looking for it. Because when they arrived, someone had already been there. And what was left behind didn't make any sense at all. You said. When detectives reached the P.O. box in that remote Idaho town, tucked between a shuttered bait shop and a crumbling diner that hadn't served a hot meal in years, it was already clear something was off. The lock had been picked. The box was empty. But inside the small, rust-stained compartment, there was a scrap of paper wedged deep in the corner, folded with care but clearly left in haste. On it, a string of numbers, coordinates, as it turned out, along with a simple message. He's not done yet. At first, they thought it might be a cruel prank, something left by a local who had caught wind of the case. But the handwriting matched notes found in Mark's storage account records, documents obtained just weeks before, when the investigation had quietly shifted to financial surveillance. The message was real, and it hinted at something far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. Back at headquarters, the team tried to decipher the coordinates. They led to a remote clearing just outside the Bitterroot Mountains, an area known more for backcountry hunters than criminal activity. When a small team arrived to investigate, they found remnants of a campsite, old, burned logs, a half-dug fire pit, and what looked like charred remains of paper and plastic. Among the ash was a half-melted USB flash drive. It was barely intact, but forensics was able to extract one corrupted file. What played on the screen that night chilled everyone in the room. It was a grainy, time-stamped video, less than 30 seconds long, showing Rachel Monroe in what appeared to be a confined space, her eyes swollen, her mouth taped shut, and behind her, the shadow of a man just out of frame. The quality was poor, and the timestamp had been manipulated, but the metadata confirmed it had been created months after Rachel was presumed dead. The working theory had always been that Rachel was killed the night she disappeared. But this video changed everything. If she had been alive for weeks afterward, held somewhere, then they had missed their window. And worse, if Rachel had been kept alive, could others still be out there? While the team was grappling with that revelation, another shock came from a completely unexpected source, Mark Delaney's younger sister, Hannah. She hadn't spoken publicly in years. Not since the trial where their father, a former corrections officer, was convicted of assaulting an inmate and falsifying reports. A dark cloud had followed the Delaney family ever since. Hannah had left the state and rebuilt her life in Denver, working in social work and avoiding any association with her brother's shadowy life. But then, without warning, she called the station. She claimed to have received a package. No return address. No note. Just a single item inside, an old photograph. It was from their childhood, Mark at age 10, standing in a forest clearing beside what looked like a man in a park ranger's uniform. But what caught her attention wasn't the people in the photo, it was the background. A distinct set of carvings on a tree trunk behind them, matching the same markings found at the Idaho campsite. Hannah had no idea how someone got her address. She hadn't spoken to Mark in over a decade. But now she felt like someone wanted her to remember something buried in that part of their past they never spoke about. That tree, that place, it was near an old family cabin in the mountains, long abandoned, a place they used to visit every summer before everything in their family cracked apart. She told the detectives she believed Mark had returned there, that maybe he never really left. And as if things couldn't get stranger, a new forensic audit of Mark's old hard drives revealed something disturbing: recordings. Not videos, but audio logs. Some were clearly notes for work projects, mundane observations, snippets of conversations. But one stood out. A voice memo, dated just days before Rachel went missing, where Mark recited what sounded like a list of names. Victims? Collaborators? Investigators weren't sure. But one of the names he spoke was Emily Vargas. That moment shattered any illusion of distance. Detective Vargas had believed she was on the outside, chasing a ghost. But this confirmed that the ghost had seen her too. Her involvement was no longer about solving a case, it had become personal. And when she reviewed footage from her apartment building that week, her stomach sank. A man, hooded, standing by the fire exit for 22 minutes. He never entered. He never touched anything. He just watched. And then he disappeared into the night. Even Kevin Hale, Mark's former partner, who had been riding the line between ally and antagonist, began to look more suspicious. Financial records showed that Kevin had received a $12,000 wire transfer from an anonymous source just 2 days after Danielle Carter went missing. When pressed, Kevin claimed it was part of a cryptocurrency investment deal, something he'd been dabbling in since his fallout with Mark. But the trail didn't add up. The account that transferred the funds had been created using a proxy tied to the same encrypted VPN Mark used to hide his financial movements. Could Kevin be more involved than he let on? Was he helping investigators or quietly working against them? At this point, nothing could be taken at face value. Every ally looked like a suspect. Every lead opened new doors instead of closing them. The once linear story had now fractured into layers, buried secrets, family trauma, financial betrayal, and something even more sinister that hadn't yet surfaced. And while the public's attention soared with hashtags like #RachelMonroeAlive and #DelaneyCaseUpdate, the investigators behind the scenes were barely holding the threads together. Because someone out there was orchestrating this with precision. And each move they made only seemed to lead deeper into the trap. Then, just when it seemed they might be reaching a breakthrough, a new clue emerged, one so bizarre, so contradictory, it threatened to collapse everything they thought they knew. Because a man claiming to be Rachel Monroe's roommate stepped forward. And he said Rachel had been alive just 2 weeks ago. Detective Emily Vargas hadn't slept in nearly 48 hours. Her eyes were bloodshot, her mind overloaded with fragments of conversations, shadowy figures on surveillance tapes, and a growing list of people who were either dead, missing, or hiding behind walls of silence. The claim from the so-called roommate had sent the entire task force into chaos. At first, they thought it was a stunt, maybe someone hungry for attention, trying to wedge themselves into a viral story. But the man knew details no outsider could. He mentioned a chipped mug with Rachel's name on it. He described a burn scar she had on her left shoulder from a campfire accident in middle school. Things that weren't public. Things only someone close could know. And then, just like that, he vanished. His number went dead. His apartment was cleared out overnight. No forwarding address, no sign of a struggle. It was as if he never existed. Emily tried to focus. She retraced her steps, combed through timelines, rewatched hours of footage, but nothing felt real anymore. That sense of creeping unease had morphed into something visceral. It wasn't just the case anymore. It was her. Someone was watching her. Of that, she was now certain. The first time it happened, she chalked it up to nerves. A dark SUV parked across from her building. Same car, 2 nights in a row, windows tinted beyond regulation. Then came the missed calls. No caller ID. Just silence when she answered. Then a breath. Just one. Followed by a click. It was subtle at first, like the hum of something just out of view. But it was building. Escalating. She could feel it tightening around her. And then it got worse. Her partner, Eli, hadn't shown up for briefing that morning. No text. No call. Emily assumed he was just late. He was always the last one in and first one out, but by mid-afternoon his phone was going straight to voicemail. When she stopped by his apartment, she found the door slightly ajar. That alone was enough to raise every alarm. Inside, everything was in place. 2 in place. The kind of neat that wasn't natural. Not for Eli, who lived like a tornado. Pizza boxes, usually stacked on the counter. Laptop open. Papers scattered. But now it looked like a staged version of his life. Couch cushions perfectly aligned, dishes clean and stacked. His badge was still there, resting on the kitchen table like it had been placed as a message. On the fridge was a single Polaroid, taped with surgical precision. It showed Eli asleep, head on the desk, taken from an angle that suggested the photographer had been standing behind him. Watching. Waiting. Emily backed out slowly, her heart pounding so loud she could barely hear her own breath. Her thoughts were spiraling. Someone had been in that apartment, and they wanted her to know it. Whoever this was, they weren't just trying to mislead the investigation anymore, they were targeting the investigators. One by one. That night, She locked herself in her place, bolted the door, drew every blind, unplugged every smart device. But paranoia doesn't need light to grow. It feeds on silence, on flickers of movement caught in the corner of your eye, on the gut instinct that someone is standing behind you just as you turn the corner. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being herded toward something, that every decision she'd made over the last week had been predicted, calculated, that somewhere in the maze of clues, someone was watching her every move and pulling strings she couldn't even see. She opened her laptop, desperate for something, anything, that might give her back control. She started digging into Mark Delaney's old email backups again, even the corrupted files that had previously gone nowhere. But this time, one document loaded. A letter. Drafted but never sent. It was addressed to someone named G. Monroe. The tone was odd, not personal, not professional. More like a confession masked as correspondence. It spoke in circles, referencing unfinished work, repairs made to broken things, and the girl who wouldn't forget. Emily stared at the line. She said she remembered the clearing, the scent of the firewood, and the feeling of being watched. I thought I erased that. I thought it was gone. She leaned back, trying to catch her breath. The letter wasn't just a cryptic note. It was a window, a sliver of insight into a mind that had clearly unraveled. But it also suggested something more terrifying, that Rachel may not have been the first, that others might have walked the same path. Victims no one had connected, people who had simply vanished, their lives rewritten or erased, swallowed up by the same force now tightening its grip around Emily. Then came the final blow. As she closed her laptop, her screen flickered. Just for a second. The desktop background changed. It now showed a photo of Emily sleeping, taken from the foot of her bed. The timestamp was that same night.
Her ears rang.
She couldn't move, couldn't scream. Every defense mechanism collapsed in that instant. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This wasn't about Mark Delaney or a twisted case gone too far. This was personal. Someone had been inside her home, watching her, breathing the same air. And she hadn't even known. There was no more illusion of safety. No more time to plan. The game had shifted, and she was no longer hunting a killer. She was the one being hunted. And just before she could react, her phone lit up with a new text from an unknown number. The walls of certainty that Detective Emily Vargas had built around the case shattered in an instant. It happened on a stormy evening, just as the rain began to pour hard enough to drown out every noise except the pounding in her own chest. She was at the precinct, alone, combing through archived case files connected to Mark Delaney, ones that predated Rachel Monroe's disappearance, hoping to find a breadcrumb she might have missed. And then she found it. A case from 2008. A child named Gracie Monroe, reported missing in a small town outside Salem, Oregon. Age 7. Brown hair. Blue eyes. Last seen walking to school. Never found. The name didn't immediately hit her, not until she saw the photo. The resemblance to Rachel was undeniable. Nearly identical features. It was like looking at the same person frozen in time, except Rachel hadn't even been born in 2008. Or so everyone thought. Emily's stomach flipped. She checked dates, cross-referenced birth records, school transfers, adoption databases. Everything began to blur until the unthinkable became impossible to ignore. Rachel Monroe wasn't Rachel Monroe. At least, not originally. She was Gracie, the missing girl from 2008. Only now, she had a new identity, a different past, and no memory of who she really was. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to erase her former life, to create a new persona from scratch. It wasn't just witness protection-level concealment. This was surgical, obsessive, planned.
But why?
Emily didn't have to wait long for answers. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number from Washington State Corrections. The voice on the line was trembling, familiar. Lisa Delaney. She was calling from a holding room where she'd been placed for her own protection. And she wanted to talk. Emily rushed over, heart in her throat, unaware she was about to learn something that would twist the entire investigation into a new and terrifying direction. Lisa sat hunched over, her hands shaking, her eyes hollow like someone who hadn't slept in days. She didn't speak for a long moment. Then, without warning, she whispered, "Rachel wasn't the first. But she wasn't the victim either. She was the reason." Emily froze, unsure how to process what she'd just heard. Lisa continued, her voice fragile but urgent, like someone revealing a truth she'd buried for far too long. "When Mark and I were still married, we had a daughter, Gracie.
But she changed.
After the fire, after she came back." Emily's heart dropped. "Came back?" she asked, her voice cracking. Lisa nodded, her eyes locked on some invisible point in the distance. "She went missing for 3 days when she was 7. Vanished without a trace. Then one morning, she walked back through the front door like nothing had happened. No scratches. No fear. Just quiet. Too quiet. Like she wasn't the same kid. She wouldn't talk about where she'd been. She wouldn't look me in the eyes. Mark said it was trauma. Said we needed to start over. We moved. Changed names. But he never told me the truth." She finally looked up at Emily. "I think he knew. I think he brought her back." The silence that followed was deafening. Emily struggled to grasp what Lisa was suggesting. That Mark had somehow faked their daughter's disappearance. Or that something else, something darker, had happened to the real Gracie. But it wasn't over. Lisa handed Emily a keycard. "There's a storage unit in Yakima. He made me promise never to go there. But if you want answers, that's where they are." Emily didn't wait. She made the 3-hour drive in near silence, the keycard clenched in her fist like a lifeline. The storage facility was nondescript, row after row of metal doors, forgotten relics of lives stored away. Unit 417. She slid the keycard, held her breath, and pulled the door open. Inside was a nightmare preserved in perfect order. Stacks of VHS tapes, labeled by date and location. A wall covered in photos, string linking faces she didn't recognize. And in the center, a mannequin wearing the same sundress Rachel, Gracie, had been wearing in the Polaroid. But the most disturbing part? A medical cot, outfitted with restraints. Next to it, a journal with Mark's handwriting. It was filled with notes, fragmented, paranoid, filled with references to reprogramming, behavioral resets, and compliance conditioning. It read like the diary of a man trying to rewire a human being into something they weren't, trying to control them. Emily stumbled back, the implications sinking in. Rachel hadn't just been a target. She'd been an experiment. Someone or something had tried to remake her. Mark had been the frontman, but he wasn't alone. And this was bigger than a murder case. Bigger than any twisted domestic horror. Back at the precinct, a new email landed in Emily's inbox. This one had no text, just an attachment. Security footage. From the very station she worked in. It showed a man walking past the evidence locker, face hidden under a hood. But then, for one frame, he turned slightly toward the camera. And Emily's heart stopped.
It was Eli.
Her partner. Missing for days. Now resurfaced in the most secure part of the station, moving with intention. And smiling. The caption below the video simply read, "You trusted the wrong person." Everything she knew had just unraveled. Every ally. Every motive. Every assumption. This wasn't a rescue mission. It was a setup. From the very beginning. Emily stood frozen, the screen still glowing with the final frame of Eli's face, his smirk barely visible beneath the dim station lights. It didn't make sense. Eli, the one person she thought she could trust, her partner, the one who had stood beside her through long nights, messy crime scenes, and dead-end leads, was now walking through restricted evidence areas like he belonged there. Like he owned the place. Like none of this was a surprise to him. 1,000 questions screamed in her head, but none louder than the one she couldn't push away. How long had he been part of this? She didn't have the luxury of time to grieve that betrayal. Less than 30 minutes after seeing the footage, she received a burner call. No caller ID. No background noise. Just a man's voice, distorted, cold, deliberate. "You've gone too far, detective. Walk away. Or she disappears again. And this time, you won't find her." The line went dead before she could speak. Emily's hand trembled as she replayed the words.
She.
There was only one person that could mean Rachel. Gracie. Whatever name she had once gone by, whatever truth was buried in her fractured memory, she was the reason this entire twisted puzzle had been set in motion. Emily faced the kind of choice that rips people apart. If she stopped now, pulled back from the case, and played it safe, Rachel might live. But the truth, the real truth, the one she'd been chasing like a ghost in the dark, would die with her NC. If she pushed forward, dug deeper, exposed the network that was clearly bigger than just Mark Delaney, she risked everything. Rachel's life.
Her own.
And the haunting possibility that it might all be for nothing if no one lived to hear what she found. She sat in her car outside Lisa Delaney's holding facility, gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles went white. She had to know, had to confront Lisa one more time, because something didn't sit right. Lisa had played the role of victim well, too well. But something about her timeline, her sudden flood of convenient revelations, and the fact that she was now under state protection all felt staged. When Emily entered the room, Lisa looked up with those same dead, mournful eyes. But Emily wasn't here for soft sympathy anymore. She got straight to it. Why didn't you tell me about Eli? Lisa's reaction was instant. Her eyes flinched. Her mouth parted slightly, but no sound came out. That hesitation, that flicker of recognition, was all Emily needed. You knew, she said, her voice a mix of rage and heartbreak.
You knew he was involved.
From the start. And you let me walk blind into it. Lisa finally responded, voice barely audible. I didn't have a choice. None of us did. He's not what you think. Emily leaned in, anger flaring. Then what is he, Lisa? Because right now, he's on camera stealing evidence that could save your daughter, and you're sitting in here playing the victim. Tears welled in Lisa's eyes, but there was a steel beneath them now. He's the one who found her, Emily. After she disappeared. He was part of the team that brought her back.
Only she wasn't right.
He told us she'd been through something unspeakable. That she might never remember who she was. He promised he could help us rebuild her life. But when she started remembering things she wasn't supposed to know, he changed. He said she had to be monitored. Said she was dangerous. Emily's world tilted again. If Lisa was telling the truth, then Eli had been a part of this much longer than she'd ever imagined. Not just a corrupt cop. Not just a mole. But someone deeply embedded in the manipulation of Rachel's identity from the very beginning. And worse, he believed Rachel was a threat. Which meant he had motive. Which meant Rachel wasn't just being watched. She was being hunted. Emily left the facility in a daze, the weight of impossible choices crashing down on her. Her phone vibrated again. This time it was a text. No number. Just a single photo. Rachel, tied to a chair, her face bruised but alive. The timestamp was today. The message beneath it, you have 24 hours. Bring the tapes. Come alone. There was no way to know where the photo was taken. No background, no windows, just darkness and concrete. But Emily had seen that kind of setting before. It looked like an abandoned substation, probably one of the old military outposts outside city limits. She had a map. She had a guess. But what she didn't have was a plan. Not one that didn't get Rachel killed. As the hours bled into night, Emily sat alone in her apartment, all the tapes spread out across her floor. Dozens of them, each potentially containing pieces of the puzzle someone was willing to kill to keep hidden. She was supposed to trade them, her only leverage, for a slim chance at saving a girl who didn't even know who she truly was. But handing them over could bury the truth forever. And Rachel's life wouldn't be the only one erased if these people got away with it. The weight of the decision felt like it could split her in half. There was no easy answer. No good choice. Just layers of betrayal, manipulation, and fear stacking higher with each hour. She finally stood, grabbed the tapes, and headed toward the door. One decision made, 100 consequences waiting. But as she reached for her car keys, she spotted something tucked under. The drive to the abandoned substation felt endless, even though Emily knew it like the back of her hand. Miles of cracked asphalt cutting through forgotten fields, the kind of place where secrets rot in silence and no one hears you scream. She clutched the box of tapes in her lap, her fingers numb, her mind racing. But it wasn't just about Rachel anymore. It hadn't been for a while. That Polaroid, the one showing her sister alive, had cracked something wide open inside her. A truth she'd buried long ago. Her sister, Lena, had vanished without a trace nearly a decade ago.
No body.
No answers. Just a long, cold silence that Emily had finally forced herself to accept. And now here she was, standing beside a girl who didn't even remember her name, caught in the same nightmare. Emily's heart thundered against her ribs as she pulled off the road and killed the headlights. The substation loomed ahead, all rusted metal and concrete walls, a place that reeked of secrets and pain. She stepped out slowly, her boots crunching on the gravel. The silence was thick.
Too thick.
She wasn't alone, and she knew it. They were watching, waiting, and every instinct screamed this was a trap. But she didn't care. She needed answers. She needed Rachel. And more than anything, she needed to know what the hell had happened to Lena. Inside, the air was stale, reeking of mold and iron. A single bulb flickered above, casting long shadows across the damp floor. That's when she saw her. Rachel, gagged and bound, slumped against the wall. Her face lit up when she saw Emily, wide eyes filled with a hope that nearly broke her. Emily rushed forward, but a voice stopped her cold. Put the box down. Step away. Eli's voice. But it wasn't just him. From the shadows emerged two more figures. One of them was Chief Marlowe. Emily's world tilted again. The chief, the one who had mentored her, who had shaped her entire approach to justice, was now standing with a man who'd threatened to kill a girl. She looked at him, disbelief carved into every inch of her face. You, she whispered. He sighed, stepping closer, his face a picture of regret, or maybe exhaustion. You were never supposed to get this far, Emily. You should have walked away when you had the chance. Her voice cracked with fury. You set me up. All of this, Mark, Lisa, the tapes, this was all orchestrated. Marlowe shook his head. It was managed. Controlled. Because if this ever came out, it would burn everything down. You think this is about one girl? You think Rachel was the only one they experimented on? There are dozens of them. Children, teenagers, all marked, all manipulated. It started as an intelligence operation years ago, tracking susceptibility to trauma-induced memory reprogramming. Your sister, she was part of Phase 1. The room started spinning. Emily felt like her chest would cave in. You knew what happened to Lena? I didn't know she'd survive, Marlowe said, not even flinching. But when she resurfaced, they moved her, kept her in the network, changed her identity, erased her past. Just like Rachel. Just like the others. Eli chimed in then, stepping forward with a hard expression. She was going to destroy everything. When the memories started to come back, she talked about whistleblowing. She found Rachel. Thought they could blow the whole thing open. That's when we had to intervene. Emily's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. You kidnapped my sister. She was unstable. Eli replied coldly. You want to help her? Hand over the box. We'll take it from here. Emily's mind fractured in 1,000 directions. Every case she'd ever worked, every file that felt too clean, every disappearance with no closure, it all fit now. It wasn't just a single corrupt cop. It was systemic. It was federal. It was a machine, chewing up people like Lena and Rachel and spitting them out as shadows of themselves. She could feel the danger pressing in around her like a vice. There was no backup coming. No one to call. It was just her, a box of tapes, and the decision that would define her forever. But before she could move, a shot rang out. It wasn't directed at her. Eli stumbled backward, blood blooming across his chest. Behind him stood Rachel, freed, armed, and shaking like a leaf. She'd managed to slip out of her restraints while the men argued, and now she held Eli's weapon in trembling hands. Marlowe swore under his breath, stepping toward her. Put it down, Rachel. You don't understand what you're doing. But Rachel's voice was steady now, clear in a way Emily had never heard before. I understand exactly what you did to me. To all of us. In that instant, Emily realized the stakes had shifted. This wasn't just about saving someone anymore. It was about fighting back, exposing everything. She ran to Rachel's side, grabbed her by the arm, and together, they turned and fled into the night, leaving Marlowe shouting behind them, the tape still clutched in Emily's hands. But they weren't out of danger. Not even close. Because as they disappeared into the woods, Emily's phone lit up with a message she couldn't ignore. You think this ends here? That was just one facility. There are 17 more. And someone you love is still inside. You said. Emily had been running on adrenaline and shattered trust for days now, but she'd never felt closer to the truth, or more completely alone. Her body ached, her mind teetered between focus and fear, and her faith in the system that once shaped her had fully disintegrated. Every hour brought more cryptic messages, more warnings, more faces from the shadows stepping forward just long enough to issue threats before disappearing again. But none of it could shake her resolve. She had the tapes. She had Rachel. And she had the final location, buried deep in encrypted files hidden within the recordings. A remote underground facility, off-grid, built beneath an abandoned juvenile detention center, long condemned, long forgotten. Until now, the drive there was a blur. Rachel sat silently in the passenger seat, her eyes haunted but determined. She wasn't just another victim anymore. She was part of the resistance, part of the truth. The closer they got to the coordinates, the more Emily felt that this wasn't just the end of their story. It was the beginning of something bigger, something they'd either expose or die trying to stop. They parked a mile out, leaving the car behind and hiking through thick brush until the rusted fencing of the old center came into view. The place looked like every bad dream a child could have. Windows shattered, vines choking the walls, a place where time had stopped and secrets had festered. They slipped through a hole in the fence, careful not to make noise. Beneath the collapsed chapel at the back of the grounds, Emily found the hatch, just like the files said. A biometric lock, half eroded, buzzed once and clicked open when she pressed Rachel's palm to it. The descent into the facility was silent except for the hum of electricity still somehow running deep below the earth. The hallway opened up to a sprawling bunker. Cameras lined the ceiling. Security doors blinked green. And at the center of it all stood Marlowe. He wasn't surprised to see them. He stood calmly, dressed in black, his badge tossed aside, his expression a mask of weary triumph. You made it, he said flatly. I was hoping you would. Emily leveled the gun at him. Don't act like this is some reunion. You destroyed people's lives. You played God. He didn't flinch. I kept this country safe. You think you're the first person who tried to expose what we do here? Every threat we've neutralized, every tragedy you read about in the news, it was part of the cover. You can't imagine how far this goes. Emily's voice cracked from the pressure, but she held her aim steady. Where's Lena? That made Marlowe pause. She was never meant to be found. I'm not asking again. He stepped aside, revealing a glass chamber behind him. Inside, a woman sat strapped to a chair, frail, unrecognizable, but alive. Emily dropped to her knees, breath stolen from her lungs. It was Lena. Years of trauma and conditioning had stolen her identity, but not her presence. Emily saw her eyes twitch, a flicker of recognition burning through the haze. Rachel moved to break the glass, but Marlowe raised his hand. You break that seal, and everyone in this facility dies. You don't know what she's carrying, what we put in her. Emily felt the world tilt again. You used her as a weapon. Marlowe nodded. A living archive of every classified experiment we ever conducted. If she gets out, all of it does.
You don't understand what's at stake.
Countries will fall. Wars will begin. You have to leave her. Emily looked at Lena, then at Rachel, then back at the monster who had orchestrated all of it. For a moment, silence reigned. The kind of silence that bends time and thought. But then Rachel, voice shaking, stepped forward. What if we don't need to get her out to get the truth out? Emily turned to her, confused, but Rachel had already pulled the flash drive from her boot. I copied everything. The tapes, the security footage. It's all on this. We don't need her to speak. We just need the world to see. Marlowe lunged, but Emily fired. Just a warning shot, forcing him to stumble back. Then, as if on cue, the emergency lights flashed red. Rachel had triggered the upload, broadcasting everything through the facility's satellite link. Across news servers, encrypted networks, even dark web forums, every hidden truth spilled into the open. All of it. But just as Emily reached for Lena, the monitors lit up with a face neither of them expected. It was Eli. Alive. Bleeding. And still part of the system. You really think this ends with him? He growled, his voice cracking over the speakers. He was just a puppet. There's someone else, someone higher. And now they know your names. You've started a war. And just like that, the feed cut out. Marlowe slumped to the ground, laughing softly as sirens blared above. You exposed it all, and still, they'll never believe you. But Emily knew better. She had the proof. She had her sister. And she had the fire to keep going. As they fled the collapsing facility, Lena weakly murmuring Emily's name for the first time in years, the night sky cracked open with helicopters. Not Black Ops. Not the agency. But the press. Journalists. Truth seekers. And as the world lit up with the story they were never meant to hear, Emily realized something chilling. The real villain? The one behind it all? They hadn't even met them yet. You said. The dust never really settles after a storm like this. It just hangs in the air long enough for people to pretend they've moved on. For weeks, Emily was caught in a whirlwind she couldn't step out of, even as the world reacted to the avalanche of truth she and Rachel had unleashed. News channels lit up with breaking stories about the underground facility, leaked experiments, missing persons who were suddenly found to have been detained under classified government programs. Hashtags exploded across social media, demanding justice, transparency, and accountability. Congressional hearings were launched. Whistleblowers emerged from shadows. But the deeper the public dug, the more they discovered that names had been erased, records had been buried, and the real architects of the conspiracy were nowhere to be found. Marlowe was arrested, but he was only the mask, the face of something that reached higher than anyone dared imagine. And Eli? He vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions and the chilling realization that someone had always been pulling the strings from a place far beyond reach. Emily tried to return to something like a normal life, but the world didn't let her forget who she had become. Her face was everywhere, her story a symbol of defiance and bravery, but also of sacrifice. She'd lost friends, her career, and the last few remnants of innocence she didn't even know she still had. Rachel stayed with her, the bond between them stronger than blood, forged in fire. Together, they worked with advocacy groups, pushing for legislation to prevent another facility like that one from ever operating again. Survivors came forward. Some found healing. Some didn't. But all of them knew they weren't alone anymore. As for Lena, recovery was slow. She spoke in fragments, memories like shards of glass, some too painful to touch, others too foggy to see clearly. But the day she looked at Emily and smiled, really smiled, was the day Emily knew she had made the right choice. No matter the cost, Lena was free. Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally. She had been weaponized, broken, manipulated, and still, she was choosing to reclaim herself. That strength was more powerful than any file, any broadcast, any headline. It was a quiet kind of revolution. And Emily realized that maybe the real victory wasn't just exposing the truth. It was surviving it. Still, there were nights Emily would wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, the face of Eli flashing in her mind like a warning that the war wasn't over. The truth had been set loose, but it hadn't destroyed the system. It had only rattled it. There were still names she didn't recognize, still questions that no one could answer, and a part of her that feared this had only been the first chapter of a much bigger story. But for now, she had peace. A kind of peace that came not from justice being fully served, but from knowing she had done everything in her power to protect the people she loved, even when it meant burning down the life she once knew. One morning, while walking past a cafe, Emily noticed a man sitting alone, reading a newspaper. She wouldn't have looked twice, except for the way he folded the paper as she passed, revealing a small scar just beneath his left ear, the same place she remembered seeing a faint mark on Eli during their last encounter. Their eyes met for only a second. No words exchanged. No panic. Just quiet recognition. And then he smiled, tipped his coffee in her direction, and vanished into the crowd. Emily didn't chase him. She didn't call anyone. She simply stood there, heart pounding, wondering what the smile meant. A threat?
A goodbye?
A new beginning? Or maybe just a reminder that some stories never really end. As the crowd moved around her and the city carried on like nothing had changed, she realized something important. Sometimes, it's not about solving every mystery or catching every villain. Sometimes it's about living with the truth, no matter how ugly it is, and choosing to keep going. Because in a world built on secrets, the greatest act of resistance is to be unbreakably honest, even when the whole world wants you to stay silent. And just like that, the camera would pull back, fading into the blur of city lights, leaving viewers with one question echoing in their minds. What would you do if you were handed the truth and told to walk away, or her windshield? A red envelope. No postage. Just her name. Inside was a single Polaroid. It was Rachel again. Only this time, she wasn't alone. Standing next to her was a face Emily hadn't seen in years. Her sister.
Who was supposed to be dead.
And suddenly, nothing in Emily's world made sense anymore.